Welcome back. Today we are going to be going over this partial payments simple interest problem. This time we are going to be using the American approach. We've already found out that the answer is $5,892.50 by doing the commercial approach. If you'd like to see the commercial approach, I will have that linked in the description. But let's get into how we would do this using the American approach. So, to recap, what's the question? The question says that a debt of $18,000 is paid in three installments, paying $8,000 after 6 months, then an additional $5,000 after 9 months, and then the remaining balance, which we earlier, by using the commercial method, figured out was $5,892.50 after 12 months. If the simple interest rate is 7%, what is the amount to be paid after 12 months for the total debt payment? Now, of course, we already figured it out, but let's just talk about how to do this using the American approach. So, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to write down the initial debt that we have. So, the initial debt that was taken out in this case was $18,000. So, over here, I'm going to write 18,000. First, we need to calculate the interest for the first 6 months, right? Because for 6 months, we don't make a single payment. And so interest is accruing. So plus, we're going to add the interest for 6 months. So the interest for 6 months. So the interest for 6 months, a reminder that interest is equal to CIR. So in this case, that's 18,000 times the interest rate, 0.07, times the amount of time that's passed in years, which if it's 6 months, that means 1/2 a year has passed. Actually, I'm going to move this just down here. There we go. Great. And that is equal to, let's see, 18,000 times 0.07 divide by 2 or times a half, same thing. Okay, so the interest for the first 6 months is $630. So that's what I'm going to write on line 2, $630. So overall, the total debt that we have after 6 months before we make the payment is $18,630. Now what we're going to do is we're going to subtract the first payment. So the first payment that is made after 6 months is $8,000. So after that payment is made, the balance should be less. The balance should now be $8,000 less dollars. So now the balance is only $10,000 and $10,630. All right, so next we have to add interest for the next chunk. So how much interest is going to accrue in the next 3 months? Because we just made a payment after 6 months. After 3 more months of interest accruing, there is going to be an additional payment of, looks like $5,000 more dollars. All right, so first we need to calculate interest for these next 3 months. So let's do that. So plus the interest for basically month for the next 3 months, let's say. Let's just say for next 3 months. All right, so that interest is going to be equal to our balance at this point, which is $10,630 times 0.07, so 7% interest, and then times the number of years, which 3 months is the same as a quarter of a year, so times 1/4. And that is going to be, let's see, 10,360 times 0.07 times a fourth, because it was only a fourth of the year and not the full year. So that's going to be $186.03. So $186.03. And that might seem like, oh wow, that's a lot less. And it's true, that is a lot less than 630, but keep in mind a couple things. First off, this is only for 3 months rather than for 6 months. So it's going to be less based on that it's less time. And also because we made that first payment, now there's less of a balance. Now we're only paying interest on about $10,630 rather than paying interest on the full $18,000 balance because a payment's been made and now our balance is lower. So there we go. So there's the interest for the next 3 months. So at month 9, before we make the payment, we owe, let's see, plus 10,630. That means that we are going to have a balance of $10,816.03 right before we make the payment. And now we're going to make a payment of $5,000. So we're going to subtract payment 2, or let's say second payment, just to be a bit more consistent here. So second payment we'll subtract, and that is going to be a payment of $5,000. So now, as of 9 months after we made the payment, we only owe $5,816.03 left. Now, it seems like if we make another payment right now today, this is all we have to pay, but the question didn't ask that. The question asked the amount to be paid after 12 months for the total debt payment. So essentially, let's say we wait another 3 months until the 12-month mark. We did just make a huge payment. Maybe we need a bit more time to save up again. If we were to be able to pay the full balance in 3 months, how much would that be? So next, what we have to do is add interest for 3 more months to fully get to the 12-month mark. So what would the interest be for the next 3 months? And really, actually, at this point, the final 3 months. So interest for the next 3 months after this. And again, this is going to be even less. We're expecting this to be even less than 186.03 because it's the same amount of time that's passing this time as before. But now we're paying interest on less debt because now we only owe $5,816.03. We don't owe the 10,000 something like we did before. So in this case, the interest is going to be equal to $5,816.03 times the interest rate times the number of years, which is 3 months, so that's a quarter of a year. So 0.07 divided by 4 times $5,816.03. That is going to be $101.78. So as we predicted, it is less than before because even though it's the same amount of time, we now have a lower balance, right? Which is why it's good to pay. If you have any high interest debt especially, it is generally good to pay that off as soon as possible because then the next payment we're going to owe less in interest than we did previously because of our previous work of making payments before. So anyways, now we have to add these up. 5816.03. If we add those together, my final answer is that the payment to be made after 12 months in order to get the remaining balance fully gone is $5,917.81. And so there we go. And let's see, is that the same as we got before? Actually, it is not. So this might seem a bit unexpected. I want to talk a bit about why we got different answers. Now, we got very, very similar answers, but why did we get different answers? Well, the reason being is because the American approach used more exact values, right? In this case, they used completely exact values here. For 6 months, we used a half a year. For 3 months, a quarter of a year. And for the next 3 months, another quarter of the year. Whereas the commercial approach is slightly different because in the commercial approach, we use things like over 360. So in this approach, it went with the actual number of days, which is 365 days for the full year. Whereas in the previous approach, it was simplified days, which is assuming there's only 360 days in the year. And that also would explain why, in this case, we got a slightly higher number. Why would the balance be slightly higher in this American calculation versus in the other calculation? It's not that much higher in the grand scheme of things, only a few dollars, but it is still higher in the American approach, where we did the American approach rather than the commercial approach when it came to solving this problem. And if you do have a textbook where they do the same question with the American approach and the commercial approach, you'll notice the same thing, that the American approach is going to get you a slightly higher balance than the commercial approach. So which one's the correct one to use? Well, it really depends on which one your bank uses, right? So oftentimes for something where precise calculations are needed, so for example, like a legal agreement or a mortgage or loan like that, often the American approach would be used. Whereas for something very much short term, like short term financials, that sort of thing, in the bond market for some simplicity, oftentimes we'd use the commercial approach. So you may be asked specifically to use either the American approach or the commercial approach, depending on the scenario. If you have any questions about that, please feel free to leave those in the comments, and we'll see you for the next one.